Welcome to the Courting Happiness podcast. This is a space where self-care becomes part of your day. A space where you learn evidence-based strategies to help your life, share it with those you love, and cultivate well-being at work. I'm your host, Dr. Kortni Alston. I'm a former news director, television reporter turned happiness scholar, TEDx speaker, and transformational trainer. I also understand hardships. While working my dream job in television, I lived a nightmare suddenly becoming a young widow after 86 days of marriage. I became committed to learning more about resilience, healing, and happiness. This is how I discovered my area of research, which is positive psychology. Now I'm living my calling of training individuals and organizations on happiness. And my new chapter begins with being happily engaged. The Courting and Courting Happiness is about a true courtship. I like to say commitment with happiness. The K in courting stands for the vulnerability of sharing my story, inspirational interviews with phenomenal people, the infusion of positive psychology, and so much more. You'll learn how to commit to your well-being one episode at a time. I hope you subscribe and share. So, are you ready? Let's get started. Welcome to episode 116. I'm Dr. Kortni Alston. I'm so happy that you're here. So, do you hear that? That's the sound of the holidays. I love the sounds of the holidays. Matter of fact, in episode 115, we talked about creating healthy holiday boundaries for a stress-free holiday season. And if you haven't had a chance to check out that transformative episode with phenomenal tips by Sharon Martin of Psychology Today, you have to listen to it. Again, that is episode 115. But today we're going to work on making the holidays even happier. And the bigger question is really, how do you go about protecting your mental health during the holiday season? So these tips are coming from the National Alliance on Mental Illness, also known as NAMI. And the article is written by Jennifer Rothman, who discusses stressors during the holiday season, including anxiety, social comparison, and even the pressures of shopping, right? Getting that perfect gift, or all these dynamics that meet and fit into the holiday season, as well as really all the dynamics as relates to the holidays, right? It could be holiday parties and even more. So what this provides is really some strategies to help you understand how to protect your mental health. And I love that she shares this. Keeping your holiday merry and bright. I mean, who doesn't want that, right? So let's take a look at Rothman's tips. And here's tip number 1. She says, accept imperfection. I can tell you, I just accepted some imperfection myself as my phone is going off as I'm doing this podcast. And it's okay, because what did I do? I just put it on Do Not Disturb Now, opposed to the fact that I normally do it earlier. But I'm so glad I'm sharing that with you, right? Because sometimes we may think, oh gosh, well, it's not perfect, so let me start all over again. And I'm learning in life to accept when things aren't perfect, accept when I have imperfections, because I have them. Accept the flaws and all. And so I love that Rothman says, do what works for you, keeping your mental wellness in mind. She reminds us about our energy and what is good about the holidays. What's good about it if your energy is low, and also what's good about it if you can't really enjoy the holidays. So she urges us to make a list and to make a decision on what can be removed. And I think that's really ideal in terms of really evaluating all the different dynamics as it relates to the holiday season. All right, here's tip number 2. Don't lose sight of what really counts. So she says, thinking about and remembering that something in terms of all these different dynamics to always keep in mind and how we're different individually as humans. So she says, what counts is something that might differ from person to person, right? Because we're all different. And this can mean spending time with our loved ones or spending some much needed time at home. But the value is remembering to be present. And I love that. Don't lose sight on what's really important. It's interesting because I earlier, my fiance Ken and I are getting everything together for Christmas and getting the house together. And one of the things I just loved, I thought about how a couple of years ago, I don't even think I could even think about, putting up decorations for Christmas. Because in 2016, my mother had passed away. And it was close to the holiday season. She died in August, not too far away from, Thanksgiving and Christmas. And she was the queen of Christmas. I've mentioned it in previous episodes of the podcast. And so I thought to myself, a few years ago, 2016, 2017, maybe even 2018, took a couple of Christmases. And I couldn't even imagine. And it's interesting because my father, when I actually go visit my family home, all those different Christmas decorations that my mother would have up, we haven't done. And so my father has pulled back. I have pulled back, and it was all a result of the loss. And the reason why I bring that up is the fact that now I get excited about what I feel what really counts. It's the fact that I'm enjoying this tree and putting it together and putting, the ornaments on the tree with my incredible fiance. I enjoy the fact that, no, the house, yes, it looks very different in terms of my mother, passing away in 2016. But I love the fact when I walk into that home and I'm spending time with my father, I know that really counts. Having those moments with him. And so when I am present, and when I am present and experiencing gratitude, focusing on all that I have, opposed to all that I don't, or what used to be, or all these other different dynamics, it allows me to be present and grateful for the fact that I had this beautiful mom who's always with me. And I say to myself, I'm so grateful that I had all these wonderful memories, and now I'm so grateful that I can create new ones and inspired by what she shared with me. So I love what Rothman says. Don't lose sight on what really counts. And and I say all that to say, because sometimes it can be challenging, right? In terms of thinking about, well, it used to be this way and now it's now this way. But what I love so much is the fact that she says how this can be different from person to person. And that's okay. And that's okay. But don't lose sight on what really counts. Tip number 2. Let's now move over to tip number 3, and it's all about being kind. I have some signs in my office on campus, and then I have the same sign in my home. And that sign says, and it talks about, it talks about kindness. And this is what it says. It reads, kindness changes everything. Think about it, right? Kindness changes everything. And Rothman reminds us that it's important to be kind to others, how essential it is to extend that to ourselves. And she reminds us that receiving and giving kindness is mutually beneficial. And one of the things that I love from one of my favorite scholars, Dr. Christian Neff, who's one of the pioneer leading scholar in one of the leading scholars in self-compassion. I love that she talks about being kind to yourself. That's self-compassion, being kind to yourself. And when we're going through different things in our lives, I always think about that. And I always think about how she frames it. And and I say this in terms of, people in general going through things, but then even my own personal life and seeing within my collective, my friends and family, which I've said in this podcast episode, previous podcast episodes, how my friends are family, and so my large family of people from cousins and aunts and uncles and girlfriends and big brothers and brothers that that we've all kind of adopted each other. And one of the things that I love in terms of creating this ripple effect as it relates to kindness is that it starts with self. It starts with you. So what I love so much about Dr. Christian Niff's understanding and sharing the value of self-compassion is that when we are compassionate with ourselves, when we are kind to ourselves, when she says, when we treat ourselves as our own best friend, I like to say our own bestie, right? The ripple effect that it creates. And so I love that Rothman is reminding us of the importance of being kind to ourselves and how giving kindness is truly mutually beneficial. So let's take a look at tip 4, and it's all about finding time to decompress. Who's listening right now is having their hand up saying yes. As soon as I read her article and as soon as I said that, I felt like having my hands up saying yes, yes. Find time to decompress. And so this is what I like to say. So just like our phones need to recharge, Rothman reminds us that as humans, we need to do it as well. And she urges us to take time to recharge and use our coping skills when we're dealing with back-to-back events, shopping, household chores, work, and all the demands of the holiday. And remember to take care of yourself. And she talks about what that means in terms of thinking about nutrition and exercise and sleep. And I love that she's talking about this in terms of a holistic dynamic, right? Because it's interesting, it can be, exhausting depending on the level of stress, one might be going through in terms of, from event to event, especially if it's overwhelming for an individual. And it's interesting because a dear friend of mine shared how she and I talked about conferences, and she shared with me how she loves staying at the host hotel of the conference because it allows her to recharge. As much as she treasures and values being around people. Sometimes when you're having back-to-back meetings or going to back-to-back events, you need some time to replenish yourself. So I love that Rothman is reminding us the importance of that, and also talking about what that looks like in terms of some self-care, right? Nutrition, exercise, and sleep. And one of the best practices that she says is this, and I want to quote her on this one. She says, familiar routines can be our best friends during these busier times. Of course, these are not the only ways to practice self-care. Pay attention to those practices that make you feel grounded and your best. She is so right. And one of the things that I often remind individuals when I'm facilitating training sessions on workplace well-being is think about all these different best practices and evidence-based strategies that you're receiving, but then also think about what works for you. Test them out. See how you feel. And I love this because she's talking about the importance of familiar routines and also paying attention to practices that make you feel grounded, that really make you feel your very best. And that's so important because remember, we're all are different. We're all different. And something that may be significant and that works for me may look a little different for you, right? And so I think it's important when we are learning about all of these different strategies and evidence-based strategies and techniques and tips that we think about all those dynamics and think about it as really our greatest laboratory in terms of experimenting and seeing what works well for us in terms of creating our own customized approach. So now let's take a look at, last but not least, there's 5 tips, and here's tip number 5. Ask for and accept help. Ask for and accept help. And it can be challenging for some of us, but it's so important. We really need to have a clarity when we are going through things, right? And I say a clarity in terms of understanding the value of support. And if we're feeling overwhelmed or finding ourselves dreading an event, ask for support. Rothman reminds us to accept with grace if a person offers to take a task off your list. And another thing that I value is that she mentions how, not to see it as a sign of weakness, but it actually shows how mindful you are, right? Mindful and being self-aware about, what's going on and saying, well, I'm a little overwhelmed right now, or maybe I'm a lot overwhelmed right now. And someone says, let me take this off your plate. I love that she says, accept it with grace. She also says this, Rothman says, you shouldn't feel guilty for accepting someone else's kindness. It gives those around you permission to do the same if they find themselves in a similar predicament in the future. Now that is something to really remind all of us of, right? Really think about is the importance of the fact of that ripple effect. Yeah, and that when we're talking about being mutually beneficial and that reciprocity, I really value that. It gives us a chance to be human and saying it's okay if something like I need to remove this. Can you do me a favor and pick up, whatever that is? Or do you mind taking care of this? Or, can you do me a favor? Or I need your help. And that can be so challenging. So a lot of great tips coming from Jennifer Rothman of NAMI. And you can read more about her article and checking out the article on the web page of this podcast, which is at drkortnialston.com/podcast/episode 116. That's drkortnialston.com/podcast/episode 116. The greatest gift you can give yourself is focusing on your well-being. And remember this, I say it often, your well-being is your most important job. And also, I'm always here to help. Thank you so much for listening. Let's continue this conversation online. Email us at podcast@drkortnialston.com. That's podcast@drkortnialston.com. Join us on Instagram at Courting Happiness. Don't forget, that's courting with a K. Also, I hope you join our private Facebook community. You can find us at Courting Happiness Podcast Community. Our private Facebook group is a safe haven to share, meet more people looking to build positive relationships, focus on well-being, and create a happier life. Now, are you ready to spread happiness? We hope you subscribe and share this podcast with your family, friends, coworkers, and all the important people in your world. We release a new episode every Thursday. Congratulations on your continued commitment to your courting happiness journey. Thank you so much for listening. We want you to be well, be happier, and be kinder to yourself. We can't wait to see you next week.